Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is a really cool space, and I think cooler than we've had in the past. So I want to start off big picture, talking about acquisition, and ask everyone, how is the work you do in your window into the government acquisition community different now than it was a couple years ago? And instead of just going straight down, I want to start with Joanne, because we were talking backstage. You're having your 25th anniversary at this program, so the longest institutional knowledge, and then we'll jump back to Juan and go down.
So I'm old. Got this? Done? All right. So how is it different? It's in some ways it's the same in that all that we have been trying to do in our program is support the customer. It's always been kind of our main focus. The tools we use change, the technology keeps improving, the amount of information certainly changes. The basic needs are still there, and it's funny when people talk about changes in modernization, but it still comes down to the customer needs something, they're not quite sure what they want, they're looking for help, trying to do it within the rules, and getting it as fast as they can, which sometimes can be in weeks and sometimes can be in years. It depends on the rules and set. So all that we try to do is to provide them with the ability to solve those problems of how to get exactly what they want in the most efficient way while still following all those fun rules that we have.
Juan, the more things change, the more they stay the same?
To a degree, certainly they do stay the same, but the rate of change, the rate of technology advancement has made it very difficult for us at times to keep up. From a contract perspective, an acquisition perspective, a statement of work that's been in place for the last 5 years is probably not going to be the statement of work we need for the next 5 years. And that rate of change has forced some challenges on some of our program staff to keep up with the rate of technology change, understand changing standards, changing technology, changing capabilities in the marketplace. And we've worked very closely with our industry partners within the agency to really help educate our government staff, but help educate industry of our needs and our challenges so that they can give us constructive recommendations that we can then use on our solicitations and our procurements.
And Anil, I'm interested in what's changed in your job. I'm hoping before you do that, can you just outline for everyone what does DHS's Silicon Valley Innovation Program do?
Sure. So Silicon Valley Innovation Program, I'll be blunt in saying that is branding, because majority of the startups that we focus on, it's a program that we put into place in order to engage with the global innovation community, in order to bring technology, harness the talent that is out there in the startup community to help solve DHS's problems, right? So, and we're not limited to just the US, because talent doesn't stop at borders. We actually work with startups globally. To answer your original question though, I don't consider myself in the acquisition business. I consider myself in the business of finding global talent to solve our local problems, right? So that is what we are trying to do.
And then, Mark, you also have a long history in the acquisition community at CBP. What's new for you in the last couple of years?
Yeah, first of all, if talent doesn't stop at our borders and that's a problem, I can fix that for you. I think one of the things, and as I think about acquisition, that is changed, is we need to understand that acquisition is no longer all about acquisition. It's fine to say that, excuse me, that acquisition is to meet a customer need for some product. But acquisition is increasingly a tool for other things: economic growth, socioeconomic development, encouraging innovation, protecting American industries. And so one of the interesting challenges in acquisition is, as I have increasing demand to be faster, more agile, more responsive, I also have increasing demands to do things that would not traditionally be considered acquisition, and they're part of my job. And I think sometimes we forget that, and even more importantly, we don't actually sit down and map that out. It's a very, very important thing to consider. When we start talking about innovating in acquisition, why don't we innovate in acquisition? If you think about it, it's because there are other things we want to do with acquisition that in some cases are equally important. So I'll stop there as a quick answer, since everybody else gave quick answers, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Okay, and just so everyone knows, I'm going to turn to the audience at some point, so please, if something strikes you, make a note of it and formulate questions and be prepared for that when that comes up. So Juan, you said that you're not part of the acquisition community in some ways. I'm curious, this model that I know is done differently in different agencies of having a foothold in Silicon Valley and trying to bring innovation from outside of government into government, what can the traditional acquisition community learn from you? And then for the other panelists, what do you want to take from what Juan is doing?
So I think you're targeting the question to me.
I'm sorry, Anil, I apologize.
Okay, just making sure. In general, consider the fact that our target audience is startup companies. That is not a silver bullet. There is a wide variety of talent across the domain that we need. So from the perspective of, if you look at the life cycle of getting a product to market, look at basic research. If you look at applied research, advanced development, and product development, we actually have a variety of other vehicles that actually target the early stages of it. Broad agency announcements, traditional acquisition mechanisms, the long-range BAA, small business innovation research. Those are all great and valuable tools in our toolbox that is using under the guidance of the federal acquisition regulations. One of the challenges that DHS faced is the fact that, especially, by the way, my colleague out in CBP is very familiar because they're one of the heavy users of the Silicon Valley Innovation Program in order to reach out and touch talent for their problems, is that there is a significant amount of innovation going on in the marketplace, in the startup community, that government is not tapping. And to be blunt, startup community does not want to work with government because the deadly embrace of government to startups is rather painful, because by the time we make up our mind using traditional mechanisms, the runway that a startup has will immediately run out. So we wanted to put a program into place that uses other transaction authority that allows us to operate at the speed of startup. The short point is that basically, from the time we make a decision to basically provide an award to the government, it usually takes 30 to 45 days for us to put a contract into place. We've done it as fast as 10 days, right? And so we operate at the speed of the startup. We do a multi-phase approach where each phase is very compressed, 6 months, less than $200K for a total amount of $800K. We don't take IP, we don't take equity in the companies. These are all attractive ways that we engage with the startup company in order to articulate what the problem that our operational components have in a language that they understand, and basically convince them that there are really, really interesting problems in the Homeland Security enterprise that they can help solve. And that is attractive to them.
Mark, can you talk a little bit about what you've taken from Anil's group?
Yeah, and it might be a little bit surprising. First of all, we love those programs because we love access to that community, that innovative community. And we leverage it quite a lot. And in fact, our commissioner is focused on and has a special counselor for this innovation. But there's some other interesting things you learn here. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative on purpose because I could rave about this initiative, but I want to say some other things that come out of it. Technology and innovation is seductive. Seduction isn't necessarily a requirement I'm trying to meet. There are an awful lot of shiny items out there, and it's very seductive. We want to associate ourselves. We want to put our arms around people that are innovative so it rubs off on us. One of the challenges we have in CBP is that everybody wants to take credit for being innovative. It creates competition. What you end up with is we certainly want more tools, and what we look for here is we want more tools, because I just talked about it, and I didn't realize I was going to be talking about it, but I got on that, so I will. That idea that all of these other demands on the acquisition community beyond acquisition, what that does is it reduces my degrees of freedom, my option space. So I like more tools because the more I'm constrained in degrees of freedom, the more tools I need to kind of optimize subject to all of those constraints, and we think that's really wonderful. But as we looked at the use of these tools, and we want to use these tools, one thing that becomes increasingly apparent, whenever we're asked about innovation, whenever we're asked about speed, we talk about processes, and this is the second microphone they gave me. We talk about processes and we talk about tools, like give me other transactional authority, right? Give me Section 880. As we've done that, what's become more and more apparent is it's not a tool problem, it's not a process problem, it's a culture problem. We've realized that we can do speedy acquisition within the FAR. We just don't do it. It's a cultural issue. So we love the tools. We love the connection that this is now built with this innovative community. We love having that. Thank you again. This is 3, right? This is the 3rd one. Let's see how long this will last. We love the fact that we connect with that community, but we're also learning it's not the panacea that it's sometimes sent out to be. So it's a really interesting set of lessons learned that we're getting as we go through these processes.
Juan and Joanne, is there a culture problem in acquisition?
Yeah, I also want to.
Please go ahead.
Go back to the original thing first, because I want to make note that my program, the SOUP program, we do operate at the speed of the startups. In fact, we operate on a daily basis. One of the interesting things to note is we add 5 new companies every day to our contract vehicle that have new, and we've hit all the big ones now. So now we're talking about more of the innovative ones, more of the smaller ones. The hardest thing to get in terms of industry and culture is startups is their fear of the government and them wanting to do it on their own. And they really need to work with existing companies and use them as a leverage so they don't have to do all the government stuff and they can just do the innovative stuff and we can get that to our government customers in that fast way. Culturally, absolutely, culture is a problem. I mean, the FAR culture, the fear FAR culture, not the, there's 2 types of looking at the FAR. One is that you're fearful of it and you don't do anything because of it. The other is to look at it as just a means to an end and using those pieces, as you mentioned, that you can be fast. The FAR doesn't keep you from being fast. It's people holding themselves back from being so.
You guys know FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation? Okay. Juan, respond to anything you want to, but also we were talking a little bit backstage about the culture issue of trying to do IT and trying to do tech with an acquisition workforce that's not necessarily doesn't necessarily have a great background in it. So if you could talk about that also.
No, great. Thank you. And back to the earlier question, the FAR does allow us to do contracts quickly. I think we have been able to demonstrate we can do contracts quickly. The authority is there. When the government has a need, the mechanisms are there to put those contracts in place. The challenge that we have found is, it goes back to the front-end process. What is the requirement? Is the requirement clear? If we issue a solicitation and we get 300 questions from industry, there was a challenge with the requirement. So we've really focused a lot of our efforts on the front-end acquisition process, putting together a team of contracting, program office staff, IT staff, to make sure that we have a clear requirement. Once we have a clear requirement, we've realized we can put contracts in place very, very quickly. To that end, earlier, I heard the earlier panel talk about shadow IT. Well, shadow IT exists for a number of reasons, for niche, capabilities or needs that were out there, in the past. And a lot of it is withheld, or historically has been maybe withheld from, or kept separate from the CIO. And what we've done at OPM is start looking at those requirements, and they have a lot of IT in them. They're like, and the answer is no, it's a service. No, it's an IT service that talks about hosting, talks about interfaces, talks about licensing, talks about IT skills. And we really force discussions within OPM to make sure that we can bring those requirements, and put CIO involved at the front end of the process, and not just dealing with, some of the consequences from, procurements on the backside. But certainly, we've had to work on the skills of our acquisition workforce, not just the contracting workforce, the acquisition workforce across the agency. To that, we've done 2 things. One, we've really put some of our acquisition people working in program offices, and had some program office people work in acquisition to kind of learn the understanding. But we've also brought in contractors to help the government understand and develop requirements that maybe we would struggle with. If a program manager or a program staff can't clearly articulate a IT requirement, there's a challenge. So we need to make sure they have the tools to be able to understand the requirement and not just use the version from 5 years ago that's really not going to meet the needs that we have for the next couple of years.
And I'm curious, Anil, you talked earlier about the warm embrace of government not being that popular in Silicon Valley. There's been a particular issue with Google and the drone program, and sort of a concern about the optics of government policy affecting the willingness of some innovative companies to be on contracts. Have you felt that at DHS? And Mark, you too. I imagine CBP is not all that popular in Silicon Valley sometimes.
That would be sort of an understatement. But yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, that is a huge problem. We have it in all kinds of things. You've seen California, for example, and some of the cities in California pass laws that say if you contract to build the wall, you can't do any business with us. So we've got that kind of stuff going on. We have a very big DHS-wide investment and plan to migrate to the cloud. And guess who just decided they're going to pull their bid? Because their workforce said, we object to having anything to do with that community. Actually, I think that was a DoD contract, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, the Jedi Cloud,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So it is an issue, it is a problem that we have to deal with. I have a contractor I'm working with now. It's a very challenging contract. It's an attempt to do something kind of transformative, revolutionary, bring change in. And that contractor has people protesting outside of their office the fact that they're doing business with Customs and Border Protection. So it's a huge issue for us in terms of our access to market, our access to competition, our access to the best thinkers. And as I think you sort of implied, a lot of that culture of resistance does tend to reside in this innovative, younger, sort of progressive community. And so that is a challenge for us.
So I'll provide a variation on that theme, right? So to answer your question, and also to bootstrap off of some of the comments that were made earlier, I think if you look at what we do as just providing a contract vehicle, then you basically become a commodity that basically is perhaps not providing much value behind contract management. So one of the ways that we have tried to address this is ensuring for example, when if you talk to an operational component like CBP or TSA or FEMA, externally people talk about requirements. I'll simply note that when you engage with your operational components, they don't talk about requirements. They talk about, I have a pain, and I need you to solve my pain for me, right? So articulating and converting the pain to something that we can do for them in order to alleviate their pain requires design thinking, engaging with the component, translating their pain into something that we can put out that is understood by the startup community. And part of the job of the Silicon Valley Innovation Program explicitly is to educate the people that we engage with, the global innovation community, whether it is the accelerators, the startups, the venture capital community, about what are the things that DHS does beyond the politics, beyond the heat and the flash. What are the concrete things that DHS as a US government agency does in order to mitigate risks for the public? And articulating that in a very clear manner, taking the politics out of it, taking the emotion out of it, and sharing with them what are the problems that you can help solve as a company that is operating in the US or elsewhere that is both beneficial to government and to them. Because our value proposition to the startup is that we do not want you to pivot into government. We want you to have a commercial roadmap, and we want you to keep to it. What we are seeing is that there is an interesting aspect of your technology that could help solve our problems. So we are willing to provide some funding in order for you to bake in our problem into your product set so that when you go out to market, you are independently sustainable, independent of government. We want that to be there. And that has actually worked out very well for us in articulating why they should work with us. So yeah, there is conversation, there is always angst, but part of it is education as well, and that is part of what we bring to the table.
Mark, and Neil just talked a little bit about this, but do you see a possible fix for this schism?
In terms of the fact that we have these vendors who are not willing to...
Right.
I think it's time. You know, I just think we have to take that as something that we understand, we recognize, and frankly, we need to respect. The other thing is, I think as members of government, we need to understand that that community represents the public as well, and we should be listening to them. So I don't see this as a long-term threat. I see this as a dialogue and part of that dialogue, and I think that over time, we'll go back and forth like that. So it's a constraint that we need to understand and accept. We can't get angry about it. We should listen to it, and we should incorporate the fact that it's there into our thinking as we go forward.
Joe, forgive me, but I disagree with your characterization as a schism, right? So I simply note that I think there is a role for government in public service. I'm sorry, but there is, right? I don't think anybody else is going to maintain a police force or maintain our borders or things like that. And I think there is things that the private sector does very well, and there are things that are not profit motive driven that only the government can do. So part of it is basically, it's not a schism, it is an articulation and it is an education on what the role of government and the individual agencies are and how we can work together in order to solve problems.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about supply chain, if we can. The Homeland Security and GSA are working together on a broad program to add cybersecurity, concerns about the cybersecurity supply chain into the acquisition process. It's real early stages, but Juan, you said you've learned a little bit about that so far. Can you talk about that?
Yes, initially working with GSA, they've had a couple of meetings outlining here's the plan of how to implement a more secure supply chain. So we're actively working with them. We're looking forward to some of the changes that may be coming out to some of the government schedules, but which is another reason to use the government schedules, and it's something that we've been moving in that direction as an agency over the last couple of years. Move away from our standalone procurement requirements to a government schedule where applicable, and I think it's been very fruitful.
And Joanne, SOUP has sort of pre-standing supply chain effort, the, if I can read my own handwriting, established authorized reseller program. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that might fit into this effort to ensure that we're not getting questionable tools in our supply chain?
All right, so I have 17 minutes, so I'll try to be fast. I was just telling him on the way in I could talk for an hour or so on this, and I do. Just some brief notes about supply chain. And one of the first notes is that I've worked closely with industry and really understand them, and that's one of the things that government tends not to do, including some of my friends in the other agencies. They tend to think they have a solution, don't talk to where industry is at, because it's usually not the same place. There's two main areas that SOUP focuses on. One is we've worked with industry and actually DoD on an international standard. It's an ISO standard now that we have several companies certified to and are trying to really start pushing it out over the next year. You'll hear hopefully more about it. It's ISO 2023. I'm going to get the number wrong. See me afterwards if you want to know the ISO standard. But it's a standard that helps reduce, if the processes are followed, it will help reduce tainting and counterfeit in the supply chain. The other area that we focus on is what you're referring to. It's not just the established authorized reseller program. It's kind of a superset of what we focus on. What we've learned is authorized resellers is something some people want to focus on. The problem is industry doesn't, and the terminology is very fluid, and most companies just want to sell the products. They don't want to care about who buys them. Other companies really care about it. That's what we have the established ones for. So for some companies, it's very important that we know that we're buying from an established program, or if not, that we're taking a risk in not doing so.
And the risk, just to be clear, is that you're getting like a counterfeit product from China or someplace that could have.
Not necessarily. So I think that's so. One of the and this is the NIST standard says this, and people don't necessarily understand. Gray market is not bad. Gray market is a little more riskier. Black market is bad. Buying from eBay from Thailand, which one of our customers wanted to do, that's bad. Buying from a general reseller through a distributor that may not be directly authorized, a lot more risk to it. You might not be getting you might be getting refurbished. You might be getting something that's been there's more risk. Counterfeit does fall into it. Risk is risk. You have to balance it. If you're buying a Cisco router to go in your main network, you probably want an authorized reseller. So what SOUP does is we focus on those main companies that we feel have the highest risk if you don't use an authorized reseller, and ensure that the customer has to make a conscious decision to not do so. And our verification process for authorized resellers is the strongest there is, because we actually go back to the industry. We don't rely on pieces of paper. If anybody's a government person out there, one takeaway, please. Don't use letters of authorization. They are meaningless. Go ask the manufacturer, go use SOUP, and we do it for you. Ask the manufacturer, are they authorized? And that's one of the many things we've learned. And authorization is, as I said, a broad spectrum of things. In our program, we have focused in making sure that we always are where industry is at and explaining to our customers that this is this is what we call a legitimate, the manufacturer considers this a legitimate purchase if they buy from this company. If you buy from somebody else, it still might be okay. Right now you're taking a risk. Please make sure that you've documented that risk and move forward accordingly.
And I'm going to go to audience questions in just a second, so please have them ready. And this is probably a Mark and Juan question. The earliest supply chain work that the government has done came through the DHS binding operational directive banning Kaspersky from government systems, and then Congress later expanded that to contractors, and the most recent National Defense Authorization Act, there are bans on Huawei and ZTE. Have you guys been part of the effort of ensuring that contractors don't have those guys on their networks, and what does that process look like?
So certainly from our end, we have been part of that process, working closely with our CIO team and the program offices to identify what's on the network, what's not on the network, where do we need to move away from. And in response to some of the directives you identified, we had to move very quickly, and it took a lot of effort to put our arms around it. But collectively, the team was able to work very successfully to move in, to accomplish the objectives, to make sure that we were complying with with the new directions or standards.
Can I just step in
please.
and mention something else? Because I think it was also for me we talk a lot about working together among contract vehicles. We actually at Soup got a call from GSA, and long before you maybe even knew about it in the press that this was going on and that we needed to act. And we acted. All of the major contract vehicles got together behind the scenes and ensured that we were not selling those products anymore all at the same time. It was actually an under...
This is before October 2017?
Yeah, before anybody knew it was happening. So I think it was a behind-the-scenes kind of feel-good story that the government sometimes seems fractured, but in fact, we did work together on a known threat identified by DHS and GSA, and it was interesting doing the phone calls and saying, let's all do it all at the same time, we push the buttons all at the same time.
Was that completed before October 2017, or you just got the ball rolling?
It was, I don't remember the exact date, I have to go back, but it was probably prior to that, and it was, I think it was in summer, and we just all kind of pushed the button and said, yep, no more, and we wiped it off our contracts. Yeah.
No, I would just say that the acquisition community, which I represent, has a role, right? We have to give tools and enforcement mechanisms. Our CIO is the one who actually exercises this and does that. But we do the same kinds of things you've heard here. We're constantly watching, constantly surveying, constantly auditing. So the acquisition community is responsible for making sure that when the CIO needs to act, the CIO has those tools. Our CIO then follows and builds those tools.
I'd also note that supply chain security means different things to different people when you talk to them, right? So one of the, everybody gets enamored of the border protection side of customs and border protection, but everybody seems to forget that the entire U.S. government was funded using customs duties until the 1920s.
We don't forget, by the way.
I know you don't. So the long and the short of it is, so on that side, on the customs, on the Office of Trade and Office of Trade Relations, for the last 3 years, I've been fortunate enough to work with them as part of our blockchain security and privacy work, and we are wrapping up some interesting proof of concept with our private sector partners around understanding the origin of goods using distributed ledger technologies that are coming from using that, and how it impacts basically our cargo release of things that is coming in. Hopefully, I am going to defer to my CBP colleagues in providing the lessons learned, but I know that we are in the process of writing up some very interesting lessons learned, rather than just talking about blockchain and basically, walking around with head on fire. We're actually doing some stuff that is actually relevant and useful and is driven from a business perspective in what we are trying to do as an organization.
If I can chime in on the proof of concepts, and that's an area that we've really focused on the last couple of years. In the past, the focus was maybe too much on solving the problems of today, keeping the lights on. Our leadership has moved a lot more to proof of concepts. So while we're working on the problems of today, really looking at these proofs of concepts. Not all of them work, and for a number of reasons, but through the proofs of concepts, we've been able to implement and develop new solutions to solve some of our long-standing problems.
Audience questions? See, there's one blue shirt in the back there, and there's a mic coming toward you.
Hi there. I'm Brian Nelson Palmer. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency, and I kind of wanted, if I could, go back to the name of the panel, really. It's kind of a question for all of you up there, but I'm just curious on, like, what, if you were to name, what are the top 3 ways that your agencies are reimagining technology acquisition to buy faster?
That was a good short question. They're almost never like that. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll give you 2, because I mentioned culture, so we're very much focused on culture, but one of them is actually go and implement tools. So, for example, Section 880, Other Transaction Authority. Those are great tools. You want them in your quiver. What we find is, and I just recently had this discussion with congressional staff. They say, we've given you this tools. I said, yes, but you gave us discretion. And if you give us discretion, you say we can do it. That doesn't mean we will, because there are all these other communities that prefer not to do it. So with those tools, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find use cases so we can bore a hole in the resistance so that others can follow through it and actually take advantage of it. And that's part 1. Part 2 is we've had discussions now about this culture question, and what we've recognized is we actually have to dedicate and build a culture, which means you have to start with a cadre of people who are tasked with exactly that, who specialize in doing it. We've always found that even with the FAR, if somebody comes in and asks me to do something in 3 months, I can do it. I don't have to use Other Transaction Authority. I don't have to use NASA SOUP. I can actually do it if I give that task to my people and then I put them full-time on it and give them all the resources they need. Problem is I can't do that across my universe, so what I have to do is I have to embed that, then I have to grow it into a kernel, and then I have to spread it out by osmosis. So we're actually talking about 4 or 5 years worth of activity to build that culture.
Well, you still have to use NASA Soup. So, and what we do is what I have found, particularly recently, is what I focus on is the information, giving a customer more information in an easier way. The Established Authorized Reseller Program, making it easy to understand when you're using a program. The most recent one is FedRAMP. We now have what I consider to be the best FedRAMP page in the government. Probably nobody knows that yet. It's one table. It's one page. You don't have to go through all the different pages trying to figure out what's FedRAMP compliant and who is. We put it all on one page, not just for SOUP. Anybody can look at it. It's public. So if you don't want to use this, you can go use it. You can go find out what's FedRAMP compliant, whether your agency already has it, where it's at in the process, and we're going to keep it up to date because we feel that to make things faster, to give you the tools to do it better, we have to give you the information better. And so that's where a lot of our focus is at.
Yep. At OPM, I think the biggest change we've done, and we're a big user of NASA SOUP, one of the biggest changes we've done is really understand what we're buying. Looking at our contracts, what have we've been buying historically? Why do we have 10 contracts that are basically buying the same thing? Every program office will say they're unique. Yes, maybe you are. But let's take a look at it. There are economies of scale. So we're really getting an understanding of why we're buying things, what we're buying. Are there quicker ways to do it? Can we align our contracts better? That's been the biggest change for us.
So educate, fund, and test. So educate both internal customers on the variety of tools that are available to us that allows us to reach the right set of talent for what they're trying to solve. Provide non-equity, non-IP-based funding to startups in order to engage with government and convince them to basically come and work to help us solve the hard problems. And finally, provide an incentive for them to do so that none of the venture capital community or others do, which is basically government acting as a reference customer in testing out a product and standing behind that going forward.
So anyone want to compete with EPA for a succinct question? In the front, wait for the mic though. Right in the front here.
Thank you all for your great comments. One question that I have is about the test and probing before you actually do acquisition. So there are technical challenges that are associated with terms. Do you feel that that is actually speeding up terms going forward?
Yes, because I think what's happening is it's allowing us to have these kinds of discussions. So this is a big thing, and it's one of the things we use with the innovative program with Silicon Valley and others. And we're getting more and more into this. How do I do tech demos and pilots, right? And what happens when you do tech demos and pilots is you can put this equipment in the hands of people, and when they're familiar with what it does, all of a sudden the things that would have been negatives to them if you just dropped it on them, like is what happened with the earliest incarnation of SBI Net, they actually have participated through all of this and see what it can and can't do, and they can define clearly what more they would like it to do. It actually improves the requirements generation process in the first place. Secondly, it actually allows those folks to say, I might be willing to compromise. If I just build requirements on a white sheet of paper, I get 99.99% reliability and 8.657 miles of range. And when you run a demo and you find you got 8.61 miles of range and 99.9% reliability, and your operator says, That's pretty good. You mean I can have that tomorrow? That's part of the benefit of these tech demos. So we try to use them quite a lot.
Yeah, I will certainly agree that demos and proof of concepts are very important. From our perspective, though, it doesn't mean buy something on a purchase card and then translate that into a sole source requirement. We just need to be very clear that we're being transparent, clear about the requirement, for the demo and how that may end up in a solicitation.
I'll simply make a note that basically there is a tendency, especially in some communities, in order to let's solve the problem, then try to find a customer for it. That is not a path to success, right? That's why for us, working with our operational components in order to define the problem, making sure they're engaged in how the companies are actually doing the work, evaluating them on a regular basis, so that at the end, there is a natural transition path and a deployment path into government is critical for us. You can't just throw it over the wall and expect somebody to magically pick it up.
Other questions? That was another succinct un-DC question. I should praise you for it. Okay, sure.
Hi, Nadia Smith. Hi, Nadia Smith with Atlas Research. I'm glad that you guys are bringing up the culture issue in innovation. So my question to you is, within your own agencies, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your culture of innovation? And if it's not a 10, what is the biggest barrier that you need to overcome to get to a 10?
Okay, so I would say it's currently a 6, which is actually good news because a couple years ago it was a 3. The biggest issue that I think, have is understanding what it means to tolerate risk and why that's good. We actually had a team come in to help us with this, and they said, you have to increase your risk tolerance. And so, good, we put a team together to do risk tolerance, and my general counsel got to me and said, I got to talk to you. Why do you want to take risk? I said, well, because I want to innovate. And they said, but you don't want to take risk. I said, yeah, because it's the cost of innovation. The interesting thing is what they got confused about was the difference between risk and reckless, right? So the real issue for us is getting people to understand and then to cover people who take risk. And the problem in government with covering people who take risk is that the person who does the covering has to be ready to be fired, right? Which means it's got to be somebody like me who doesn't care if they're fired. But we don't have a lot of those kind of people. Now, if you empower, if you cover your people, it's amazing what they'll do, because they'll go off and take those risks because they know they're not going to get fired, I'm going to get fired, and then they're having a ball. So we're working on that, and I'd say we're to a 6, but that's actually better than it sounds because a few years ago we were at a 3.
So we are DHS. We are an agency that was brought together as part of a shotgun wedding after 9/11 with a broad portfolio of missions, right? So there is no one number that I would give to any single component. There is a wide variety of appetite for risk, appetite for innovation, and rightly so, because in some cases, we don't have the luxury of basically, quote unquote, moving fast and breaking things. I'm sorry, that's not the role of government. We don't want to break things. We want to be the last backstop for the things that go wrong. So innovation is important. Understanding the risk and the gain to pain ratio in bringing in a technology. Is the gain of bringing that technology worth the pain in the change in the process and the integration worth it? Understanding all of that is a very local decision, and that is done at the program, at the component level itself.
And I do want to break things. And so I think it's important to understand we're not homogenous in this thinking, which is an interesting challenge as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
So one of the neat things of my program is, from the beginning 25 years ago, one of our 4 acquisition objectives, and I believe we're the only contract vehicle that ever had this as an acquisition objective, is to be innovative. And we've had it every iteration, and we believe it, and I was thinking before we got here about what something to say about soup, and one of the things I don't think we say enough is that we are probably the most innovative contract vehicle in the government. It's just that we're very quiet about it.
At OPM, what I can tell you is I think we're very innovative, probably high score on the innovation scale, but implementing the innovation, to what the gentleman here said about, we provide services to a lot of government, a lot of citizens across the country. So we need to be very careful. We have a lot of innovation ideas. Implementing them has been a bit of a challenge. We need to make sure that we can, continue to meet the services of the citizens of the country, and just, going from innovation to implementation of change is a bit of something that it takes time, especially when you run very large government programs that have a very wide impact.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, everyone. Hold, I think, for Connie.